thumps she had grown accustomed to over the past weeks. These were close enough to rattle the windows. Close enough to send a fine rain of dust drifting down from the ceiling. She was out of bed and reaching for her blaster before she was fully conscious, her body moving on instinct honed by years of practice. Sabé was already at the door, her own weapon drawn, her face set in the grim, focused expression that meant she was running through threat assessments at lightning speed. "Where?" Padme demanded. "South perimeter." The droids had broken through the Gungan line. Sabé's voice was tight, controlled, but Padme could hear the fear underneath. Anakin's already there. He left 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes. Padme had been asleep. Anakin had left without waking her. Something twisted in her chest. Not anger, exactly. Something worse. The knowledge that he had looked at her sleeping face and decided not to disturb her. That he had chosen to carry this alone rather than share the burden. It was sweet. It was infuriating. It was so perfectly, achingly Anakin that Padme wanted to scream. "Get me to the command center," she said. "And find airtie. I want a full situation report in 10 minutes. "Yes, Senator." Padme dressed quickly, pulling on the practical clothes she had taken to wearing during the siege. No gowns, no elaborate hairstyles. Just functional fabric and a blaster at her hip, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like a physical thing. She paused at the mirror, looked at herself. The dark circles under her eyes, the lines of tension around her mouth, the way her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her belt. She was tired, so tired, but she couldn't afford to be tired, not yet. Not while there were still people counting on her, still people who needed her to be strong. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked out the door. The command center was chaos. Screens flickered with data feeds, half of them corrupted or jammed. Officers shouted orders into comm units that crackled with static. The air smelled of ozone and fear and the faint metallic tang of blood. Anakin was at the center of it all, his back to the room, his shoulders hunched over a tactical display. He was talking to someone, his voice low and urgent, but Padme couldn't make out the words over the general din. She approached quietly, placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, actually flinched, his whole body going rigid for a split second before he recognized her touch and relaxed. "Hey," he said, not turning around. "You should be asleep. I should be here." He turned then, looked at her, and the expression on his face broke something open in Padme's chest that she hadn't realized was still sealed shut. He looked like he was drowning, like he was holding himself together by sheer force of will and the faint, desperate hope that if he just kept moving, just kept fighting, just kept doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, maybe the ground wouldn't open up and swallow him whole. "The Gungan line is broken," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "We lost almost 300 in the last hour. General Tarpals is holding the secondary position, but he's asking for reinforcements we don't have. What about the civilians in the southern settlements? Being evacuated. Slowly. The droids are pushing too fast for a clean withdrawal." He swallowed. "We're going to lose the southern farmland, all of it." Padme closed her eyes, felt the loss settle into her bones like a cold weight. The southern farmland, the breadbasket of Naboo, the fields that had fed her people for generations. Gone, just like that. "Okay," she said, because there was nothing else to say. Because the alternative was to fall apart, and she couldn't fall apart. Not here, not now. "Okay, what do you need from me?" Anakin looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, squeezed it. "Just once. Just enough. Stay alive," he said. "That's all I need." She squeezed back. "You too." He let go, turned back to the tactical display. And Padme watched him go, this man who had fallen into her life like a meteor, bright and burning and impossible to ignore, and she thought, with a clarity that was almost painful, "I love him. I love him, and I am going to lose him, and there is nothing I can do about it." She pushed the thought down, locked it away, and got to work. Ahsoka dropped out of hyperspace into a nightmare. The Tantive 3 was gone. Not damaged, not drifting, gone, reduced to a cloud of debris and frozen atmosphere and the faint, fading echoes of life, support systems that would never function again. She stared at the wreckage field, her hands trembling on the controls, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The ship was dark, completely dark. No lights, no signals, no life. Senator Organa was dead. She knew it with the same certainty that she knew her own name. Knew it in her bones, in her blood, in the hollow, aching space behind her ribs where the Force whispered its terrible truths. She had left him there. She had taken the data crystal and run, because that was what he had told her to do, because that was the mission, because the mission was more important than any single life, even his. But knowing that didn't make it hurt less, didn't make the guilt any easier to carry. She checked her comm. The coordinates Master Obi-Wan had sent were still there, glowing softly on the screen. A rendezvous point. A safe harbor. A place where she could deliver what she was carrying, and maybe, stop feeling like the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on her small, trembling shoulders. She punched in the coordinates. Set the navicomputer. Took one last look at the wreckage field, at the tomb of a man who had fed her dinner and given her a bed and called her brave. "May the Force be with you," she whispered. Then she jumped. The council chamber was silent when Leia walked in, not the respectful silence of meditation or the tense silence of anticipation. This was the silence of people who had already made their decision and were waiting for her to accept it. Master Yoda sat at the head of the semicircle, his ancient eyes tracking her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Master Windu was to his left, his expression carved from granite. Master Gallia stood to the right, her posture carefully neutral, her eyes flicking to Leia with something that might have been sympathy. "You wish to go to Naboo," Master Windu said. "Not a question." "Yes. The hyperlanes are compromised. The Separatist presence in the system is significant. The risk to your life. I don't care. You should." "No." Leia's voice was flat. "Final. I should not. I don't care about the risk. I don't care about the politics. I don't care about the strategic implications or the diplomatic fallout or any of the other things that you care about. I care about Anakin Skywalker. And I'm going to get to him." The silence stretched. Master Yoda tapped his staff against the floor, once, twice. The sound echoed in the stillness like a heartbeat. "Understand, we do," he said slowly. "Your concern, your fear, your love." Leia flinched. She hadn't expected him to say that word. "Love, out loud, in this room. Understand, we do," he repeated. "But permit, we cannot. Not yet." "Not yet?" Leia's voice rose. "What does not yet mean? That you'll let me go when it's convenient. When the hyperlanes are clear, when the war is over. He could be dead by then. He could be. Alive he is." Master Yoda's voice was gentle, firm. "Feel it you do. Alive he is. But reach him you cannot. Not from here. Not now." "Then when?" Master Yoda was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Soon. Very soon. But not yet." "Patience. You must have. Patience." Leia laughed. It was a terrible sound, sharp and broken. "You want me to be patient while he's dying, while they're all dying. You want me to sit here and wait and be patient. Want, I do not. Advise, I do. There is a difference." Leia stared at him. At this ancient, impossibly old creature who had seen centuries of war and loss and death and still sat here, still counseled patience, still asked her to wait. She wanted to scream, wanted to tear the room apart with her bare hands, wanted to reach into the Force and pull this entire temple down around their ears. But she didn't, because that was what the darkness wanted. That was what the rage wanted, and Leia had spent too many years fighting that darkness to let it win now. "Fine," she said. The word tasted like blood. "Fine, I'll wait." "But not long." "I won't wait long." Master Yoda nodded. "Long, you will not need to. Promise, I make." Leia turned and walked out. She didn't look back, couldn't look back. If she looked back, she would see the pity in their eyes, and she would shatter. She made it to the corridor before her legs gave out. Rice caught her, steadied her, held her upright while she breathed. In, out, in, out. "He's alive," she whispered, to herself, to Rice, to the empty, indifferent universe. "He's alive, he's alive, he's alive, he's alive." Rice didn't say anything, just held her. And for once, Leia let him. The weeks that followed Leia's return from Alderaan settled into a rhythm that was equal parts grueling and necessary. Master Dralig had her in the training rooms 3 times a week, working through basic forms with a practice saber that felt alien in her grip. The weight was wrong. The balance was wrong. Everything about holding a weapon that wasn't a blaster felt like wearing someone else's skin. But she adapted. She always adapted. "You're thinking too much," Dralig told her one afternoon, circling her with the patient grace of a man who had taught hundreds of students. "The form is not a sequence to memorize. It is a conversation between your body and the Force." "I don't have a conversation with the Force," Leia replied, resetting her stance. "I have an argument." He laughed at that. Actually laughed. "Then argue more efficiently." The physical work was easier than she expected. Her body remembered discipline, remembered the precision of movement that came from years of combat training. What surprised her was how the Force amplified that memory, how a slight push against the current of energy around her could extend her reach, add speed to a strike, turn a clumsy recovery into something almost elegant. Almost. She was still hitting walls, literal ones on 2 occasions. Dralig had the good grace not to mention the scorch marks she left on the padded surfaces. The mental work was harder, shielding they called it. Building barriers between herself and the constant press of other emotions, other intentions, other lives brushing against her awareness. The Jedi built walls. Thick, immovable walls of Force energy that separated them from the chaos outside. Leia couldn't do walls. Every time she tried, the structure felt wrong. Too rigid, too much like a cage she was building around herself. "It's not a cage," Obi-Wan told her one evening, when she'd stayed late and he'd found her sitting in an empty training room, staring at nothing. "It's a door. You choose what comes in and what stays out. A door implies I'm letting things through," she said. "I don't want things through." "Then what do you want?" Silence. She wanted silence. She wanted the constant hum of other people's feelings to stop pressing against her skin. She wanted to not know that the initiate 3 rooms away was anxious about an exam, or that the healer in the corridor was grieving a patient she'd lost that morning. She wanted to not feel the distant, terrible pull of Palpatine's attention like a hook behind her sternum. But she also knew that the silence would be its own kind of prison. Luke had tried to explain it once, in the early days when she was still learning what she was. The Force connected everything. To sever that connection entirely was to sever yourself from life. So she found her own way. Not walls, not doors, something more like folding, taking all the noise, all the sensation, all the overwhelming input and tucking it inside herself, compressing it, making it small enough to hold without being crushed. Dralig called it unorthodox. Master Gallia called it concerning. Obi-Wan called it fascinating. Leia called it survival. The legal brief landed on Padmé's desk on a Tuesday morning, 300 pages of dense legal argument that made Erte groan and Sabe whistle low. "It's good," Dorme said, flipping through the summary. "Really good. The precedent they're citing goes back to the Ruasan Reformation. The argument that the Order's acquisition of the clones falls under their mandate to protect the Republic from Sith incursion is," she trailed off, shaking her head. "It's thin, but it's not nothing. It's not supposed to be a slam dunk," Padmé said, reading over her shoulder. "It's supposed to be enough to get the court to hear the case. Once they hear it, once the evidence is presented, the facts speak for themselves." "And if the court decides the Order has jurisdiction," Ertai asked, "what then? Do we just hand over 1 million soldiers to the Jedi?" "We hand them their freedom," Padmé corrected firmly. "The Order's code doesn't permit slavery. If the clones fall under their authority, the Order is legally obligated to grant them the rights of any sentient being under their protection. That's the whole point. It was elegant in theory, terrifying in practice. The Order would gain enormous political capital overnight. The Senate would lose direct control of the military, and Palpatine would lose his leash. That was the part Padmé couldn't say aloud, not yet. Not until she was sure. On Christophsis, the sky was the color of bruised plums, and the ground was the color of blood. Anakin stood at the edge of the forward command post, watching the Separatist line advance with the slow, grinding inevitability of a glacier. Droids didn't tire, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the weight of what they were doing. He envied them that, just a little. "Sir," Rex appeared at his elbow, helmet tucked under his arm. "Scouts report movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like they're bringing up heavy artillery. Timing? An hour, maybe less." Anakin nodded, running calculations in his head. Troop positions, supply lines, evacuation routes for the civilians still trapped in the lower city. The numbers were bad. They'd been bad for weeks. Every day they got a little worse. "Pull the Eastern Battalion back to the secondary line," he ordered. "I don't want them caught in the open when those guns start firing. And get Ahsoka up in the air. I want eyes on that artillery before it's in range." "Yes, sir." Rex hesitated. "The men are tired. I know. They've been fighting for 6 weeks straight. No rotation. No relief." "I know, Rex." Anakin turned to face him fully. His captain looked exhausted. They all did. Anakin could feel it in the Force, a constant low thrum of weariness and fear and stubborn, grinding determination. "I put in the request 3 times. The Council says they don't have the ships. With respect, sir, that's not good enough." No, it isn't." Anakin rubbed his face with both hands. "I'll put in a 4th. And I'll talk to Master Windu directly if I have to. But right now, I need you to hold the line for 1 more day. Can you do that?" Rex's jaw worked for a moment. Then he nodded, sharp and final. 1 more day. It was always 1 more day. The message from Shmi came through on a secure channel that Leia had set up months ago, encoded in a cipher that would have made Han proud. Short, the way Shmi communicated when she was worried. "Are you eating, sleeping, taking care of yourself?" Leia stared at the 3 questions and felt her throat tighten. She typed back, "Yes, working on the 3rd. The response came almost immediately. "Working on it is not the same as doing it. Call me tonight." Leia set the datapad down and pressed her palms flat against the desk until the trembling in her hands stopped. Then she picked it back up and typed, "I'll call, I promise." She did call. 3 hours later, curled up in the window seat of her room in Padme's apartment, with the city lights painting gold streaks across her face, Shmi's voice was warm and steady on the other end, asking careful questions about Leia's training, about her work, about whether she was letting people help her. "I'm fine," Leia said, for the 15th time. "You say that like it's a shield," Shmi observed gently. "Isn't everything?" A pause. Then, softly, "Not with me. You don't have to be fine with me, Leia. You just have to be." Leia closed her eyes. Let the words settle into the cracks in her chest. "I'm scared," she whispered. It was the truest thing she'd said in weeks, about all of it, the training, the politics, the war. "I'm scared I'm going to fail." "That I already have. That everything I'm doing is just delaying the inevitable." "The inevitable is only inevitable if you stop fighting," Shmi said. "And you have never stopped fighting." "Not once. Maybe I should." "No, you shouldn't." Shmi's voice hardened, just slightly, just enough. "You were brought here for a reason. Whether that reason is the Force, or fate, or simple stubbornness, you are here. And you will do what you came to do. But you don't have to do it alone. You never did. And you don't have to start now." Leia pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window. "Watch the traffic flow in endless rivers of light below. What if I'm not strong enough? Then we'll be strong for you, all of us. Padme, Anakin, Obi-Wan, me. Even that ridiculous protocol droid of yours." A smile in her voice. "You don't have to carry it all, Leia. You never did. The vote on emergency powers failed by 3 seats. Palpatine's face, when the results were announced, was a masterwork of controlled disappointment. He congratulated the Senate on their diligence, expressed his understanding of their concerns, and retired to his office with a gracious bow that made Leia want to put her fist through the nearest viewport. 3 seats. 3 votes. That was all that separated the Republic from handing Palpatine the power to expel systems at will, to reshape the galaxy according to his design without even the pretense of democratic process. "He'll try again," Senator Darsana said quietly, falling into step beside Leia as they left the chamber. His long fingers were pressed together in that way they had when he was thinking. "Sooner than we expect. I know. And next time, he'll have more leverage. The war is escalating. People are frightened. Frightened people give away their freedoms willingly. I know that too. Leia stopped walking. Turned to face him. Which is why we need to end this. Not the war. The man behind it. Darsana studied her for a long moment. His dark eyes were unreadable, but his fingers twitched in a pattern Leia had learned meant deep consideration. You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. It's not enough. Not yet. But it's something. Then we work with what we have. He offered his arm. Come. Senator Sadashasa is buying lunch. She insists it's a celebration, though I cannot imagine what we are celebrating. Survival, Leia said, taking his arm. It's always survival. The nights on Christophsis were the worst. Not because of the fighting, though the fighting never truly stopped. Not because of the cold, though the temperature dropped enough to make the metal of his armor ache against his skin. It was the silence between the explosions, the moments when Anakin could feel every single life on the battlefield, bright and flickering and terrified, and he couldn't do anything about it. He sat on the roof of the command building, legs dangling over the edge, and tried to meditate the way Obi-Wan had taught him, the way Leia had described it to him over a crackling comlink 3 weeks ago. Tuck yourself in, into your skin, into your bones. Make yourself small enough that the world can't reach you. It didn't work, not really. The world always reached him, always had, but he tried. Because trying was all he had. Sir? Ahsoka's voice came from behind him. Small, careful, the way she sounded when she was trying not to be a Padawan and just be a 14-year-old girl who was scared. Come up here, he said, not turning around. She did. Sat next to him, legs dangling the same way, her montrals twitching in the cold air. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched the stars wheel overhead, indifferent and beautiful, and so far away from all the ugliness below. Do you think it ever ends? Ahsoka asked finally. The fighting? Yeah. It ends. Anakin kept his voice steady, certain, even though he wasn't. It always ends. The question is, what's left when it does? What do you think will be left? He thought about Padme, about his mother, about Leia somewhere on Coruscant, fighting her own war with words and laws and the slow grinding machinery of politics. About Obi-Wan, probably in some other hell, probably trying to negotiate peace while people died around him. About Rex and Cody and all the brothers who had been made for this and deserved so much more than this. People, he said. If we do this right, there'll be people left, people who get to choose what comes next. Ahsoka was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned sideways, pressing her shoulder against his arm. A small, solid point of contact in the vast dark. I hope so, she whispered. Me too, kid. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close. Me too. The court date was set for 6 weeks out. Padme received the notification on a Thursday afternoon, sandwiched between a budget meeting and a call with Queen Jamilia, and felt her stomach drop through the floor. 6 weeks. 6 weeks to prepare the testimony, to coordinate with the order, to make sure every piece of evidence was airtight and every legal argument was bulletproof. 6 weeks to convince the highest judicial body in the Republic that 1 million sentient beings deserved to be free. We're ready, Bale said when she called him that evening. His voice was calm, steady. The voice of a man who had been preparing for this moment for years. The brief is solid. The evidence is comprehensive. And we have the Order's cooperation, which is more than I thought we'd get. It's not enough, Padme said. She was pacing her office, heels ticking against the polished floor. The court will want testimony. First-hand accounts. They'll want to hear from the clones themselves. Then we give them that. We have volunteers. Rex has a list of men who are willing to speak. And if the Senate pushes back, if Palpatine uses his influence to delay, to obstruct, Padme. Bale's voice cut through her spiral, gentle but firm. We've done the work. We've built the case. We've laid the groundwork. Now we trust the process. And we trust each other. She stopped pacing, pressed her palm flat against the window, watched the sun set over Coruscant, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I trust you, she said softly. I trust all of you. She swallowed. I'm afraid of what happens if we lose. Then we don't lose. Simple, certain. The voice of a man who had decided long ago that this was the hill he would die on. We don't lose, Padme, not this time. The training session with Master Gallia was different from the ones with Dralig, less physical, more introspective. They sat in a small meditation room near the top of the temple, the walls lined with ancient tapestries that depicted scenes from the Order's history, battles, peace negotiations, the founding of the temple itself. "Tell me what you feel," Gallia said, her dark eyes steady on Leia's face. Leia closed her eyes, reached out carefully the way she'd been practicing. The Force was everywhere, in the stones beneath her, in the air she breathed, in the living things that grew in the gardens below, and the stars that burned in the void above. It was in Gallia, a warm, steady presence like banked coals. It was in the building itself, old and patient and vast, and it was in her, had always been in her. A current running beneath everything she was, connecting her to every moment she'd ever lived, every person she'd ever loved, every loss she'd ever carried. "I feel connected," Leia said slowly, "to everything. It's like I'm a thread in a tapestry, and if I pull, the whole thing moves." Gallia nodded. "And when you pull, things change, sometimes in ways I expect, sometimes not." Leia opened her eyes. "On Geonosis, when the factory was collapsing, I reached out and held the ceiling up, just for a few seconds, long enough for the team to get clear. But I felt it, every crack, every fracture. The whole structure trying to tear itself apart and me holding it together with nothing but will and—" She trailed off, shook her head. "I don't know what else." "Faith," Gallia suggested. Leia snorted. "I don't have faith. You have something, whatever you call it. It held that ceiling up, and it's been holding you up for a very long time." Gallia leaned forward slightly. "The question isn't whether you're connected to the Force, Leia. You are, profoundly. The question is whether you're willing to trust that connection, to let it carry you when your own strength isn't enough." Leia was quiet for a long time, thinking about Luke, about the way he'd reached for her across the void of death, across the impossible distance between what was and what had been, about the way his presence lived in her mind, warm and constant and achingly familiar. "I trust him," she said finally. "My brother, he's the connection, the one I can always find, the one that never breaks." Gallia smiled, small and knowing. "Then start there. Start with what you trust. And build outward." The message from Naboo came at 0300, pulling Padme from a restless sleep. She was upright before the second chime, heart hammering, hands already reaching for the datapad on her nightstand. Siege line broken, eastern sector compromised, casualties mounting, request immediate reinforcements. She read it 3 times, then she was moving, pulling on clothes, calling Airtie, calling Bail, calling the temple. Her mind was already racing through logistics, through options, through the terrible arithmetic of war. How many ships did they have? How many could they spare? How long would it take to get them there? How many people would die in the meantime? "Padme." Sabe's voice came through the comm, steady and calm. "The anchor in the storm. Breathe. We'll figure this out. People are dying, Sabe. I know. And we're going to help them. But you can't do that if you're falling apart. So breathe. And then we work." Padme breathed. In, out, in, out. The way her mother had taught her when she was 8 and the weight of the crown had first settled on her head. The way she taught herself in the years since, when the weight had grown too heavy to bear alone. Then she picked up the comm and started making calls. Anakin felt it before the message came, a ripple in the Force, distant but unmistakable. Padme's fear, Padme's determination, Padme's fierce, burning love for the people she was trying to save. He was already moving before Rex finished the sentence. "Get the 501s mobilized, full combat load." "We're going to Naboo." "Sir, the Council hasn't." "I don't care what the Council hasn't done. Padme needs us. Naboo needs us. And I am not going to sit here and wait for permission while people die." Anakin turned to face Rex fully. His captain's expression was unreadable behind the helmet, but his posture was steady. "Ready. Are you with me?" Rex was quiet for 1 heartbeat. 2. Then he snapped his helmet on and said, "Always, sir." The hyperspace jump was 14 hours. 14 hours of sitting in the cockpit of his fighter, staring at the mottled blue tunnel of light and trying not to think about what he'd find on the other side. He thought about Padme, about the way she'd looked at him the last time they'd spoken, her eyes bright with unshed tears and her voice steady with forced calm. About the way she'd said his name, soft and wondering, like she couldn't quite believe he was real. He thought about his mother. About the last time he'd seen her, standing in the doorway of Padme's apartment, her hand raised in a small wave and her smile wide and warm and just a little bit sad. "Come back safe," she'd said. "Come back to me." He thought about Leia, about the conversation they'd had 3 nights ago, her voice crackling over the comm, tired and raw and more honest than he'd ever heard her. "I'm scared, Anakin. I'm scared all the time. But I keep going because stopping isn't an option." He thought about Obi-Wan, about the way his former master had looked at him the day he'd left for Christophsis, pride and worry and love warring in those blue eyes. "You're ready," Obi-Wan had said. "You've been ready for a long time. You just didn't know it yet. 14 hours. Anakin closed his eyes and let the hum of the engines fill the silence. Let the force flow through him, steady and warm and endless. Let it carry him forward into whatever came next. He was ready. He'd been ready for a long time. He just hadn't known it yet. The morning after the factory attack on Geonosis, Leia woke in a medical bay that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Her body ached in places she hadn't known could ache, and there was a persistent ringing in her ears that no amount of blinking could shake. She lay still for a long moment, cataloguing injuries. Bruises along her ribs. A sprain in her left wrist. The burn on her forearm had been treated and wrapped. Nothing broken, nothing that would keep her down for long. But the silence was what bothered her most. Not the physical quiet of the room, but the absence in her mind. The place where Luke's presence usually hummed, warm and constant, felt thin, stretched, like a signal struggling through static. She reached for him, carefully, the way she'd been practicing with the Jedi. Found him, but barely. A flicker where there should have been a flame. "Leia," he whispered, and the relief in his voice was so raw it made her chest tighten. "You're awake. I'm awake." She let herself breathe. Let herself feel the solid reality of the bed beneath her, the cool air on her skin, the distant murmur of voices beyond the door. What happened? You don't remember? You don't remember. She closed her eyes. Tried to sort through the scattered images. Running, the factory floor, droids, a door she shouldn't have opened, the sense of something vast and terrible on the other side. "I got the data." "Yes," Luke said softly. "You got the data." But the way he said it, the careful neutrality underneath, told her there was more, something she wasn't ready to hear yet. She tucked that knowledge away the way she tucked everything away when she wasn't ready to deal with it, into her skin, into her bones, somewhere safe until she could face it. The door opened and Anakin stepped in, still in his flight suit, grease streaked across his jaw. He looked exhausted. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He also looked like he was trying very hard not to show either of those things. "You're awake," he said, and the relief in his voice was so similar to Luke's that Leia felt something twist in her chest. "Barely," she managed. "How long?" 6 hours. He pulled a chair over, sat down heavily. "You gave them quite a scare." Ran into the factory alone, grabbed data from a terminal that was supposed to be offline, and then the whole section started collapsing around you. "I got out. Barely." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Rex had to drag you out of the rubble. You were unconscious. Bleeding," he thought. He stopped, swallowed. He thought you were gone. Leia felt the words land like stones in still water. She thought of Rex, steady and dependable Rex, who had carried her out of a collapsing building without hesitation, who had probably been terrified the entire time and hadn't shown any of it. "I'm sorry," she said, because it felt like the right thing, because she owed him that much. "Don't be sorry." Anakin's voice was rough. "Just don't do it again. Not like that." "Not alone." "I wasn't trying to be alone. I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I know, but next time let someone come with you. Let someone watch your back. You don't have to carry everything by yourself." The words were so earnest, so completely without guile, that Leia didn't know what to say. She settled for a small nod, watching Anakin's shoulders drop slightly in response. "Rest," he said, standing. "The medics say you need at least another day before you're cleared to travel." "I'll make sure no one bothers you. Anakin." He paused at the door, turning back. "Thank you," Leia said, "for checking on me." He smiled, tired but genuine, always. The flight back to Coruscant was quiet. Leia spent most of it in a semi-conscious state, drifting between sleep and waking, aware of the ship's gentle hum and the distant murmur of crew conversations. 3PO hovered at the edge of her awareness, fretting and fussing, but she didn't have the energy to tell him to stop. When they landed, Padme was waiting. She stood at the base of the ramp, flanked by Sabe and Airtai, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes red-rimmed. She wore the deep blue of her Senate robes, her hair arranged in the elaborate style that meant she'd come straight from a session. She looked exhausted. She looked furious. She looked like she'd been crying and was determined not to do it again. Leia descended the ramp slowly, one hand on the railing, the other pressed against her bruised ribs. Padme's eyes tracked every movement, every wince, and by the time Leia reached the bottom, her composure had cracked entirely. "You absolute fool," Padme said, her voice shaking. "You reckless, stupid, magnificent fool." And then she was pulling Leia into a hug so tight it hurt, pressing her face into Leia's shoulder and breathing in ragged gasps that might have been sobs if Padme would ever allow herself to actually cry. Leia hugged back carefully, mindful of her injuries, felt Padme's fingers dig into the fabric of her jacket, felt the tremor running through her body. "I'm sorry," Leia whispered. "I'm sorry I worried you. Don't you dare apologize to me." Padme pulled back, gripping Leia's shoulders, looking her in the eyes with an intensity that brooked no argument. "You are not allowed to die. Do you understand me? You are not allowed to die and leave me here to clean up your mess." "Understood," Leia said, and managed a weak smile. Padme stared at her for another moment, then seemed to deflate. The anger drained out, leaving only exhaustion and relief, and a bone-deep weariness that Leia recognized from her own reflection. "Come home," Padme said softly. "Please. Just come home." The apartment felt smaller than Leia remembered, or maybe it was just that she was seeing it differently now, through the lens of everything that had happened. The familiar furniture, the soft lighting, the scent of the herbal tea Shmi favored. All of it felt both achingly familiar and strangely distant, like a memory viewed through water. Shmi was there, of course. She always was. She met Leia at the door with a hug that lasted longer than either of them would admit, pressing her lips to Leia's temple and murmuring words in a language Leia didn't fully understand, but felt in her bones. "You're hurt," Shmi said, pulling back to examine her. Not a question, an observation, stated with the calm certainty of a woman who had spent her life reading the signs of damage on the people she loved. "Nothing serious. Everything is serious until it isn't." Shmi's hands moved to Leia's face, tilting it gently, checking her eyes. "Sit, I'll make tea. You'll tell me everything." And Leia did. She sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of lavender and engine grease, and told Shmi everything. The factory, the data, the collapse, the moment she thought she wouldn't make it out. The moment Rex had dragged her free. Shmi listened without interrupting. Her hands kept moving, preparing tea, setting out cups, but her attention was entirely on Leia. When Leia finished, there was a long silence. "You'll carry too much," Shmi said at last. "You always have. Since the moment you appeared in my life, you carried things that would break most people. And you keep adding to the weight. I don't have a choice. There is always a choice." Shmi set a cup in front of Leia, wrapping her hands around it. "The choice is not whether to carry the weight. The choice is whether to carry it alone." Leia looked down at the tea, watching the steam curl and dissipate. "I don't know how to do it any other way." "Then you'll learn," Shmi said simply. "Because you're going to keep carrying it, and you're going to keep almost dying, and I'm not going to keep watching you do it alone. So you'll learn, or I'll make you." There was no anger in her voice, just a quiet, unyielding certainty that made Leia's throat tighten. "Okay," Leia whispered. "I'll try." Shmi nodded, satisfied. "Good, now drink your tea, and then you're going to sleep, real sleep. Not the half-conscious drifting you've been doing for the past week. You're going to close your eyes, and you're going to rest. and I'm going to sit right here and make sure nothing disturbs you." Wanted to say she had work to do, reports to file, people to contact, but the exhaustion was settling into her bones like lead, and Shmi's presence was a warm, steady anchor that made resistance feel pointless. She drank the tea. It tasted like home, like safety, like the one place in the galaxy where she didn't have to be anything other than exactly what she was. She slept. The legal brief landed on Padmé's desk 3 days later, and it changed everything. She read it twice, then a third time, her fingers pressing against the datapad as if she could physically hold the words in place. The language was precise, careful, built on months of research and consultation, but the implications were staggering. The Republic did not own the clones, the Jedi Order did. The legal argument was built on the original commission, the chain of custody, the financial transactions that had created the army. Every credit had flowed through the Order's accounts. Every contract had been signed under their authority. The Senate had funded the war effort, yes, but the soldiers themselves belonged to the Jedi, had always belonged to the Jedi, and the Jedi Code did not permit slavery. Padmé set the datapad down and pressed her palms flat against the desk, breathing slowly, in, out, the way her mother had taught her when she was 8, and the weight of the crown had first settled on her head. "This changes everything," she said. "It changes the approach," Bale corrected, standing across from her desk with his arms crossed. His expression was calm, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "It doesn't change the goal. The goal is freedom," Padmé said, "for all of them. Not just the ones we can squeeze into a vote, not just the ones the Senate deigns to acknowledge, all of them." "Yes," Bale nodded. "And this gives us the leverage to make that happen. If the Order is legally responsible for the clones, then the Order is legally obligated to grant them rights, to treat them as sentient beings under their protection, to free them. And the Senate funds the war. The Senate can choose to continue funding or to withdraw support. But they cannot claim ownership of beings they did not create, did not purchase, and did not train. That authority belongs to the Order, and the Order's code demands better." Padmé thought of Rex, of Cody, of all the soldiers she'd met, all the faces she'd learned to recognize. She thought of the way they stood at attention, the way they followed orders without question, the way they looked at her with an earnest hope that broke her heart every single time. "They deserve better," she said. "Yes," Bale agreed, "they do. On Mandalore, the situation was deteriorating. Duchess Satine's government held, but barely. Deathwatch grew bolder with each passing week, their attacks more frequent, more targeted, more personal. The new Mandalorians' commitment to pacifism was being tested to its breaking point, and the people were starting to wonder if peace was worth the price of helplessness." Obi-Wan received the reports with a growing sense of dread. He'd been on Mandalore before, during the Civil War. He remembered the devastation, the loss, the way a planet could tear itself apart when its people couldn't agree on the most fundamental questions of how to live. He didn't want to see it happen again. "We need to talk to her," he told Cody, pacing the length of his quarters. "The Duchess. We need to understand what she's willing to do, what she's not willing to do, where her lines are. And if her line is no violence, ever, under any circumstances?" Cody asked, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. His expression was neutral, but his tone carried a note of skepticism. "Then we find another way. There might not be another way." Obi-Wan stopped pacing, turned to face Cody. "There's always another way. Sometimes there isn't, sir." Cody's voice was quiet, steady, the voice of a man who had seen too many battles to believe in easy solutions. "Sometimes the only way forward is through. And sometimes that means fighting." Obi-Wan wanted to argue, wanted to insist that there was always a diplomatic solution, always a way to talk instead of shoot. But he thought of the clones, of the soldiers who followed orders because they'd been built to follow orders, of the war that was consuming the galaxy one system at a time, of the Chancellor, smiling and smooth and patient, waiting for the right moment to make his move. "Yes," Obi-Wan said quietly, "sometimes it does." The vote on emergency powers failed by 3 seats. Palpatine's face, when the results were announced, was a masterwork of controlled disappointment. He congratulated the Senate on their diligence, expressed his understanding of their concerns, and retired to his office with a gracious bow that made Leia want to put her fist through the nearest viewport. 3 seats. 3 votes. That was all that separated the Republic from handing Palpatine the power to expel systems at will, to reshape the galaxy according to his design without even the pretense of democratic process. "He'll try again," Senator Darsana said quietly, falling into step beside Leia as they left the chamber. His long fingers were pressed together in that way they had when he was thinking. "Sooner than we expect, I know. And next time he'll have more leverage. The war is escalating. People are frightened. Frightened people give away their freedoms willingly. I know that too." Leia stopped walking, turned to face him. "Which is why we need to end this. Not the war, the man behind it." Darsana studied her for a long moment. His dark eyes were unreadable, but his fingers twitched in a pattern Leia had learned meant deep consideration. "You have a plan. I have the beginning of one. It's not enough, not yet. But it's something. Then we work with what we have." He offered his arm. "Come. Senator Sadash Assa is buying lunch. She insists it's a celebration, though I cannot imagine what we're celebrating." "Survival," Leia said, taking his arm. "It's always survival." Anakin looked out over the desert, sensing electrical signals in the distance, feeling life under them deep in the dark. He didn't like that. He couldn't keep track like this all of the time, and it didn't help that the longer they stayed, the more the landscape seemed to press in on him. The heat, the dust, the endless grinding sameness of it all. "Sir." Rex spoke softly, like he knew that Anakin was so keyed into sounds that he'd explode if Rex said anything louder. "We've got movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like they're bringing up heavy artillery. Timing? An hour? Maybe less." Anakin nodded, running calculations in his head. Troop positions, supply lines, evacuation routes for the civilians still trapped in the lower city. The numbers were bad. They'd been bad for weeks. Every day they got a little worse. "Pull the Eastern Battalion back to the secondary line," he ordered. "I don't want them caught in the open when those guns start firing. And get Ahsoka up in the air. I want eyes on that artillery before it's in range." "Yes, sir." Rex hesitated. "The men are tired." "I know. They've been fighting for 6 weeks straight. No rotation. No relief." "I know, Rex." Anakin turned to face him fully. His captain looked exhausted. They all did. Anakin could feel it in the Force, a constant low thrum of weariness and fear and stubborn, grinding determination. "I've put in the request 3 times. The Council says they don't have the ships. With respect, sir, that's not good enough." "No, it isn't." Anakin rubbed his face with both hands. "I'll put in a 4th. And I'll talk to Master Windu directly if I have to. But right now, I need you to hold the line for 1 more day. Can you do that?" Rex's jaw worked for a moment. Then he nodded, sharp and final. 1 more day. It was always 1 more day. Leia stood at the window of Padme's office, watching the cityscape blur past in the fading light. The traffic was a river of gold and white, flowing in endless patterns that never quite repeated. Below, the Senate dome caught the last rays of the sun and threw them back in a blaze of amber and rose. She pressed her fingers against the glass, feeling the cool surface against her skin, thinking about the data she pulled from Geonosis, about what it meant, about what it could become in the wrong hands. The plans were incomplete, fragmentary, but they were enough to see the shape of what was being built. A station, massive, a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, capable of destroying a planet with a single shot. And the Separatists were building it, or trying to. The plans were still in development, still being refined, but the framework was there, the engineering, the resource allocation. All of it pointed to something vast and terrible, something that could end the war in a single devastating stroke. Leia closed her eyes, breathed, tried to push the knowledge down, to tuck it away where it wouldn't consume her, but it was too big, too heavy, too important. She opened her eyes and turned from the window. Padme was watching her from across the room, her expression unreadable. "You look like you're about to tell me something terrible." "I might be." Leia crossed the room, sat down heavily in the chair across from Padme's desk. "I need to tell you about what I found on Geonosis." Padme set down her datapad, folded her hands, waited. And Leia told her about the station, about the weapon, about the plans that were still incomplete but already terrifying in their scope, about the resources being poured into its construction, about the timeline that suggested it could be operational within a year, maybe less. Padme listened without interrupting. Her face remained calm, controlled, but her fingers tightened around each other until the knuckles went white. When Leia finished, there was a long silence. "The Council needs to know," Padme said at last. "They do, and the Senate." "Yes, and the Chancellor." Leia hesitated. The name caught in her throat like a thorn. "He needs to know too." Padme watched her for a moment, reading something in her expression that Leia hadn't meant to show. Then she nodded slowly. "You don't trust him." It wasn't a question, and Leia didn't bother to pretend it was. "No," she said, "I don't." The morning light on Alderaan was different from Coruscant's artificial glow. It came soft and golden through the palace windows, carrying with it the scent of mountain air and distant snow. Leia stood at the edge of the balcony overlooking the Caldera city, her fingers resting on the cold stone railing, and tried to remember what it felt like to be home. It didn't feel like home. Not anymore. Not when every face she saw belonged to strangers who wore her mother's smile, when every corridor echoed with footsteps that weren't quite hers, when the very stones beneath her feet remembered a girl who had never existed in this timeline. "You're up early," a voice said behind her. Leia turned to find Queen Breha standing in the doorway, wrapped in a simple morning robe, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger than Leia remembered from the paintings and holo recordings of her later years, softer, less weighed down by the crown she hadn't yet fully grown into. "I couldn't sleep," Leia admitted. "Neither could I." Breha stepped onto the balcony, standing beside her. They looked out over the city together, the white spires catching the first true rays of sun. "Bail is already in his study. He says he has something important to discuss with you. About the refugee routes? About you." Breha's gaze was steady, curious, but not unkind. "He wants to know more, about where you came from, about what you can do, about why you carry yourself like someone who has already lost everything." Leia said nothing. There was nothing she could say that wouldn't be a lie or a half-truth wrapped in another half-truth. "He won't press," Breha added softly, "but he is worried. For Padme, for Anakin, for all of you. He wants to help. But he doesn't know how if you won't let him see what needs helping." "I appreciate the concern," Leia said carefully, "but there are things I can't explain. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Breha nodded slowly. "Then perhaps you can tell me this. Are you safe here? Truly safe?" The question was simple. The answer was complicated. "Yes," Leia said, and meant it in the way that mattered most. "I'm safe." Breha studied her for a long moment, then reached out and briefly touched Leia's hand. A small gesture. A queen's benediction offered to a stranger who wore her family's name. "Come to breakfast when you're ready," she said. "Bail will wait." She left. Leia stayed at the railing, watching the city wake, and wondered how long she could keep standing in the shadow of a life that wasn't hers without being swallowed whole. The meeting with Senator Organa was less an interrogation than a careful, patient unfolding. He sat across from Leia in his private study, a cup of untouched tea between them, and asked his questions with the quiet persistence of a man who had spent decades learning how to listen. "You've been on Naboo for over a year now," he began. "Working for Padme, traveling with the Jedi, helping with the refugee committee. All of it remarkable work. But none of it explains how a woman with no recorded history in any Republic database arrived on a desert planet with a boy who would become a Jedi Knight, and then followed him to Coruscant as though she'd been waiting for him her entire life." Leia kept her hands still in her lap. "I was waiting for him, for Anakin specifically, for any of them, for someone who could help, for someone who would listen." She chose her words with surgical precision. "I had skills, I had knowledge. What I didn't have was a place to use them. Shmi gave me that place. Padme gave me purpose. The Jedi gave me context. Context for what? For what I can do. She let her fingers flex slightly, feeling the Force hum beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. I'm not trained the way they are. I don't have their discipline or their codes, but I can feel it, I can use it, and I've been using it for a very long time in ways that kept me alive when nothing else would have. Senator Organa was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You speak as though survival was not a choice, but a necessity imposed on you." "It was." "By whom?" Leia met his gaze steadily. "By circumstances, by people who wanted me dead, or contained, or broken. I chose to be none of those things." He nodded slowly. "And now? Now I choose to be useful, to Padme, to the Republic, to the people who need what I can offer." She paused. "And to keep Anakin alive. And Obi-Wan. And Ahsoka. And anyone else I can reach." There was a long silence. Senator Organa picked up his tea, took a sip, set it down. "Padme trusts you completely," he said. "That is not a small thing. She does not give her trust easily, nor does she give it blindly. If she says you are family, then I believe her. But I need to know that you understand what that means, what it costs, what it requires. I understand. Do you? Because what I see when I look at you is someone who is terrified, not of me, not of this conversation, but of being seen, of being known, of someone looking at you and recognizing something you spent a lifetime hiding." Leia's throat tightened. She looked away. "I won't ask you to tell me what it is," Organa said gently. "But I will ask you to let us help you carry it, whatever it is. You don't have to do this alone." "I'm not alone," Leia said. "I have Shmi, I have Padme, I have—" She stopped, swallowed. "I have people, yes." "You do." He smiled just slightly. "And now you have me, and Breha, and Alderaan if you need it, for whatever comes next." It was more than she deserved, more than she had any right to ask for. But she took it, because refusing would be a cruelty to the people offering it, and because some part of her, the small, starving, desperately lonely part, wanted nothing more than to believe that she was allowed to be held. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," he said. "Now, shall we discuss the refugee routes?" On Ryloth, the sky was the color of bruised plums, and the ground was the color of blood. Anakin stood at the edge of the forward command post, watching the Separatist line advance with the slow, grinding inevitability of a glacier. Droids didn't tire, didn't hesitate, didn't feel the weight of what they were doing. He'd been here for 3 weeks now. 3 weeks of fighting and retreating and fighting again, of watching his men fall and watching more take their place, of making decisions that cost lives and trying not to think about the faces attached to the numbers. Rex appeared at his shoulder, helmet tucked under his arm. "Scouts report movement on the eastern ridge. Looks like they're bringing up heavy artillery." "Timing? An hour." "Maybe less." Anakin nodded, running calculations in his head. Troop positions, supply lines, evacuation routes for the civilians still trapped in the lower city. The numbers were bad. They'd been bad for weeks. Every day they got a little worse. "Pull the Eastern Battalion back to the secondary line," he ordered. "I don't want them caught in the open when those guns start firing. And get Ahsoka up in the air. I want eyes on that artillery before it's in range." "Yes, sir," Rex hesitated. "The men are tired, I know. They've been fighting for 6 weeks straight. No rotation. No relief." "I know, Rex." Anakin turned to face him fully. His captain looked exhausted. They all did. Anakin could feel it in the Force, a constant low thrum of weariness and fear and stubborn, grinding determination. "I've put in the request 3 times. The Council says they don't have the ships. With respect, sir, that's not good enough." "No, it isn't." Anakin rubbed his face with both hands. "I'll put in a 4th. And I'll talk to Master Windu directly if I have to, but right now I need you to hold the line for 1 more day. Can you do that?" Rex's jaw worked for a moment. Then he nodded, sharp and final. 1 more day. It was always 1 more day. Padme stood at her window, looking out over the plaza between the executive building and the Senate dome, and tried to reconcile the quiet, pristine peace of it with the galaxy as she understood it in those moments. She pressed her fingers against the pane, feeling the slight catching of her skin against the smooth surface, knowing she'd leave a smudge when she pulled her hand away, and wondering at how little effort it took to dirty something, just by letting a person touch it, spoil it. Her mood was distinctly gloomy when Sabe led Obi-Wan and Ahsoka into the room, and Padme could tell that Obi-Wan at least had noticed. His Senator Amidala was completely respectful, but his smile was a little broader than normal, as if he was trying to compensate for hers being a little small. "Master Kenobi, thank you for coming by. Thank you for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to see you." There was a slight awkwardness to the dance of getting them seated, just enough that Padme knew she wasn't seeing them often enough. That she'd let Leia's interactions with Obi-Wan and Ahsoka count as Padme's interactions, instead of maintaining a close enough relationship of her own. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" Obi-Wan asked. Padme could tell his focus was still on her, trying to weigh her concerns, to guess what they might be. Probably to help alleviate them. It was a little thing, and she could have let it make her more depressed. That she was seen through so easily, and the people assumed she needed help. But then, well, it was Obi-Wan. Kind, steady, infuriatingly perceptive Obi-Wan. And he was here, which meant the Order wasn't completely ignoring her, which meant there was still a chance that the legal case would move forward, which meant, "The court has accepted the filing," she said, cutting straight to the point. "The case will be heard at the start of the next session, but the Chancellor is pushing back, hard." Obi-Wan's smile faded. "In what way?" "He's questioning the standing of the plaintiffs, suggesting that the Order's authority over the clones is not as clear-cut as we're claiming. And she hesitated, "he's asking questions about Leia." That got a reaction. Obi-Wan went very still. Ahsoka looked up sharply.